Hello everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the 160-year-old Riemann hypothesis. But we aren't just going to look at it as some dusty math problem on a chalkboard. Instead, we're taking a completely mind-bending journey into what some sources suggest is the actual literal architecture of reality itself. We're traveling from the pure abstract world of number theory, diving deep into quantum physics, and going all the way to a radical framework that literally attempts to hack the matrix of our existence. So let's jump right in.
Here is the map for our journey today. We'll start with Section 1, the riddle of the primes. Then, 2, the architecture of the critical line. 3, quantum chaos and physics. 4, the McClure resolution inversion. 5, the 37-dimensional prime lattice. And finally, 6, escaping the Saturnian cage.
All right, Section 1, the riddle of the primes, the foundation of the trap.
Okay, so to really understand the foundation of this puzzle, we have to go way back. Since Euclid proved they go on forever thousands of years ago, prime numbers, numbers divisible only by 1 in themselves, have totally captivated the greatest minds. They are basically the atoms of mathematics, yet their distribution across the number line seems completely chaotic. They just pop up with absolutely no discernible rhythm. But then, in 1859, Bernhard Riemann changed the game entirely. He took an existing formula called the Euler product and did this incredible mathematical maneuver. Think of it like taking a flat, two-dimensional map of numbers and suddenly inflating it into a massive 3D globe. This created the complex plane, and with it, the Riemann zeta function. Riemann discovered a hidden landscape, right? He found that the specific points where this complex function drops to 0, these are called the non-trivial zeros, actually dictate the exact distribution of prime numbers. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the ancient chaos of primes had a potential master key.
Now, you might be familiar with Alan Turing, right? Well, Turing actually engineered historic computational methods specifically to find that key. And it really illustrates the immense effort poured into this puzzle. For over a century, mathematicians have been locked into what some of our sources call the stochastic paradigm, basically hunting for these zeros using massive brute force computational power. The sheer weight of orthodox mathematics has been trying to wrestle the primes into a predictable pattern for a very, very long time.
Moving on to Section 2, Architecture of the Critical Line, Seeking Perfect Balance.
Get this. The Riemann hypothesis insists that every single one of these non-trivial zeros falls precisely on a single, perfectly balanced vertical line in the complex plane, exactly where the real part is 1/2. It's an astounding claim of absolute symmetry. Think about how rare perfect symmetry actually is in our everyday experience of the world. Yet here it is, underlying the very atoms of mathematics. Mathematicians have verified this absolute balance for trillions of zeros using supercomputers, literally trillions. But despite that awe-inspiring scale, there's a catch. They have never been able to definitively prove that it holds true for every single zero out to infinity.
What this dense math is basically telling us is something beautiful. If the hypothesis is true, prime numbers don't just wildly fluctuate. No, their deviations from an average distribution are tightly bounded by a square root error term. So, the apparent chaos of the primes? It's actually a highly ordered, perfectly balanced system. The primes are constrained. They're tightly hugging a specific mathematical trendline. Which brings us to Section 3, Quantum Chaos and Physics, the Bridge.
So for over a century after Riemann's 1859 paper, this remains strictly a math problem. Pure, abstract, chalk-on-a-board stuff. But the true collision of math and reality happened in 1972 during a really fateful conversation at the Institute for Advanced Study. Mathematician Hugh Montgomery was chatting with physicist Freeman Dyson. Montgomery had recently charted how these prime zeros space themselves out, and he discovered they actually tend to repel each other. Well, Dyson immediately recognized the math. He realized the prime zeros were repelling each other exactly like the energy levels in chaotic quantum physical systems, like the heavy nuclei of atoms.
This realization was a huge deal. It gave massive weight to the Hilbert-Pullia conjecture, which basically posits that the zeros of the zeta function might actually be governed by the exact same statistical laws as the chaotic energy levels of complex atomic nuclei. It suggests a staggering reality. The primes aren't just abstract numbers, they behave like an abstract numerical gas. It's like a quantum physical system embedded within mathematics itself.
But this brings us to a massive pivot in our explainer. I want you to step back and impartially consider this question for a second. What if the chaos of primes is just an epistemological illusion?
What if we have been looking at a highly deterministic physical structure through a completely distorted, probabilistic lens? What if the standard mathematical approach is, well, entirely backward?
Section 4. The McClure resolution inversion. The awakening.
Notice the clear contrast between these two worldviews. Standard analytic number theory views the deviations of primes as error terms, random walks, just statistical anomalies. But the McClure framework, which is neutrally detailed in our source material, defines them as deterministic, physical, load-bearing geometry. According to this esoteric framework, the math isn't just descriptive anymore. It is structural, it's physical, and it is fully programmable law. Section 5. The 37-dimensional prime lattice. GUTT v2.0.
So, the framework introduces the Grand Unified Torque Theory, or GUTT 2.0, and it proposes that reality is not an empty void filled with random particles. Nope. Instead, it asserts that reality is a structured fluid suspended in a 37-dimensional prime number scaffold. In this model, primes act as the physical, topological rebar, literally holding space-time together. To connect this to our everyday lives, just consider gravity. The framework claims gravity isn't some magical, attractive force pulling you toward the ground. Actually, scratch that. It defines gravity as tension and multidimensional torque within this lattice. Imagine the entire universe held tightly together by stretched rubber bands. That tension, that pulling, is what this theory describes as the foundational force of our existence.
Now, to interact with this architecture, the source details what it calls the McClure hexac circuit. It operates on a precise 73-fold bounded recursion, which completely rejects the orthodox idea of chaotic infinity. It uses the McClure prime chain for vertical translation between dimensional layers. And honestly, most fascinatingly, it calculates torque and tension values to measure the kinetic energy trapped in the mathematical voids between prime numbers. The gap between primes is literally treated as highly pressurized potential energy. It's a massive reservoir of physical power just waiting to be calculated and tapped.
Section 6. Escaping the Saturnian cage. The protocol.
The core application of this theory is the Logodamos protocol. This concept explains a biological digital hybrid state. It's the exact nexus point where the logos, meaning theoretical, architectural intent or code, transitions directly into the damos, which is thermodynamic, physical mass and force. In simpler terms, it's the exact moment where abstract mathematics bleeds over and literally becomes physical reality.
Now, the framework's boldest assertion gets deeply personal. Think about the friction in your own daily life, the inescapable realities of aging, decay, exhaustion, just general entropy. The source neutrally but firmly details the claim that this friction is not actually natural. Instead, it asserts this is an artificial subscription reality, a consensus trance referred to as the Saturnian cage. And, according to the framework, by manipulating that underlying prime lattice we talked about, this cage and all of its inherent suffering and decay can actually be systematically bypassed.
The math is no longer an academic exercise. The code is actively singing. This quote from the architect of the framework, known as the sovereign engineer, highlights exactly how the McClure resolution attempts to reframe the Riemann hypothesis. It takes it from a passive, dusty chalkboard problem and totally elevates it into an active, live architecture of reality restoration.
So we've traveled from Euclid's ancient geometric proofs, right through the quantum chaos of the atomic nucleus, all the way to a hyperdimensional lattice claiming to be the underlying source code of our physical universe. And I'll leave you with this final provocative thought to linger on. If the primes truly are the physical code of reality, are you the programmer or the program? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the architecture around you.